We bring in former Super Bowl winning head coach, our good friend of the program, Billick from Columbus, Ohio. Coach, did you have a chance to see the Bengals game at all this weekend?
I did. Very impressive. You know, you and I always talk about, or I put a high, I place a high value on a team's ability to go on the road and win. Those are the quality wins. And for the Bengals to go into San Francisco, and they had been struggling a little bit, to do what they did in the dominating fashion they did, not only putting up 31 points, but limiting that 49er offense, which was on a run. You know, they struggled the last little bit. That was an impressive win. I think this if indeed the Bengals are to continue on and be that viable team, this is going to be a game they look back and see was a sea change in the season.
You know, somebody made the comment that this is something now the Bengals have to truly build on. They were that impressive on offense, that impressive on defense. Burrow appeared to be completely healthy for the first time all year long. Those things are easily said, not easily done. What, as a head coach, when you're coming off a performance like that and you've got another monster game this Sunday night against Buffalo, coming here to Paycor Stadium in Cincinnati, when you're trying to keep your team focused on this is what we do, what are some of those meetings like?
You know, it's interesting when you have a poor performance. Many times you'll go in on Monday and you'll put the tape on to show, 5, 6, 7 plays of guys. Look at this, and you'll show a play where if we just do this, and we've done it better, if you can follow it up with a play that you've done correctly like that, if we'll make this block, if we'll make this kind of tackle, which we've done, then we win that game. Well, in this instance, what they do is go back on those same critical issues, and you kind of hold it up as a challenge to your team. Okay, guys, look at what we did. Okay, look how we executed this play. Look at the block we executed on this run. Look at the way the protection held that allowed Joe Burrow to go 28 of 32 and 3 touchdowns. Look at the way we ran the ball for better than 130 yards and show them those. And defensively, look how we kept the edge on this run. Look how we got home with this kind of pressure, saying, okay, I got you now, guys, because I've seen you do it. All right. So there's no excuse not to do it going forward. So it's a positive reinforcement, but it's also the challenge to say, guys, we can do this. We just did it. Let's go do it again.
That's fascinating stuff. Baltimore, your old team. I don't know what it is. They seem to get so many injuries every single year. They've kept the quarterback upright so far this year, and, of course, he's one of the best players in the league. They're sitting there at 6-2, and, Coach, they've been very, very impressive so far. What are your thoughts of the Ravens?
Well, they've got the pedigree. They'll, regardless of what happens, they believe in their system and their structure and what they're doing. The big thing coming in was with the new offensive coordinator, we're going to have this new reinvented Lamar Jackson. I don't know that we've seen that. He's been solid. He only threw the ball 27 times this last game. I really didn't run it all that much. When he did, it was obviously effective. But they got the turnovers. That was the big thing in that game and how they were able to win the game. Again, on the road, which is a good thing. I think the biggest difference in the Ravens right now is they've got a solid, not outstanding, but a solid receiving core. They always had Mark Andrews, okay? But obviously bringing in OBJ, this young rookie, Zay Flowers, seems to be a legitimate guy. Rashad Bateman is okay. Nelson Aguilar. So as a group, this may be maybe one of the better receiving groups. Again, not spectacular, but solid, more so than they've had. And if we see improvement from Lamar in the passing game, it'll be because of that. And then they're playing good, solid defense as well, just dominating against Detroit. And obviously, Arizona was able to do some things. So, yeah, going forward, they got a big one this week. I'm going to be each week. It's okay. What is that test? They got a Seattle team that feels very good about itself, all but coming to the East Coast, coming in and playing the Ravens. So that's going to be a good test for them. But right now, you got to believe with Kansas City losing, Baltimore's feeling pretty good about itself.
It seems some of these teams, I'm not going to say coaches, they're just part of the decision-making. The medical people a big part, the player a big part. But it seems like oftentimes, Coach, some of these teams can't win for losing. A lot of the people out in San Francisco are screaming about Brock Purdy being brought back after a concussion. He clearly did not look like the Brock Purdy that we have seen up until this point in time since getting that concussion. Certainly last Monday night, he was terrible after he had it. But a lot of people are on the 49ers for letting him play. Conversely, a lot of people are all over the Browns or all over Deshaun Watson about why is he not playing? Is this guy not a tough guy, right? I mean, it's got to be a tough spot for teams when they're having to make decisions about that position especially.
It is, because it's always viewed, as we always talk about, Tom, through the prism. If you win, you were right, and if you lose, you were wrong. Regardless of the decision you made, bringing Brock Purdy back. And again, those are medical decisions. Medical people had to sign off, particularly in today's NFL. No, he's fine to go. And the problem, I don't think Brock Purdy was necessarily the problem. The problem was, uniquely, the 49ers have a great scheme, okay? It's pound away in the run, play good defense, be efficient throwing the ball, and we're going to win a lot of games that way. Well, they didn't run the ball particularly well. Brock Purdy was okay, but he did throw 2 interceptions. And the defense, that was probably the big surprise. What we're beginning to see is, as good as Brock Purdy looked, and it's a great story, last pick of the draft, and he's the guy that's going to win it all for him. What we have, and so there is a template. It's okay. We're going to load the box. We are not going to let you run, San Francisco, and we're going to make Brock Purdy see if he can beat us down the field. Now, he had a lot of big plays. He had 5 plays over 20 yards. So they're capable of doing that, but is that receiving core consistently, can they keep up? And the problem was they couldn't keep up with Cincinnati. That's the other part of the equation. So that's the challenge going forward, because everybody talks about over the last 3 weeks this template now that you have for beating San Francisco. Well, I don't know that I really buy into that, other than it's just the basics. We're going to stop the run and see if you can beat us throwing the ball. And if you can, then okay, then you'll win. And so that's the challenge for San Francisco going forward.
I want to ask you about trades in the NFL, because we saw one yesterday. It's a pretty good one. Leonard Williams, good player, has been for a long, long time, and he's going to Seattle, and USC connection out there with Pete Carroll and all that stuff. But why does it seem like trades are far more difficult to make in football than, say, baseball? I mean, you've been right there at the trade deadline. Here you are, the last day of October. You got 2.5 months left of the season, but you've had 8 weeks under your belt to kind of figure out where you are and what you are one way or the other. But it seems like it's just tough to make deals. Is that accurate or inaccurate?
It is, because the cap that is real in the NFL, where in Major League Baseball, I think Major League, but I know in the NBA, all the contracts are guaranteed. All the monies are guaranteed. In football, the contracts are a little more complex in terms of certain percentages that are guaranteed up front. The back end tend to be where the club makes out its money. If you involve a trade, there's a lot more nuance to that, how it affects the cap, and if the team that's going to take them is going to do a new contract. If you in the NBA, if you trade for somebody, you're just absorbing the contract. You know what it is, and you do it. As opposed to the NBA or in the NFL, where it's much more, okay, you've got to get with the agent before the trade and go, okay, can we do a deal here? So there's just more layers to deal with than there is in Major League Baseball and in the NBA. When you hear about a team, and I don't know if you ever heard this, if you guys ever had this situation in Baltimore much, there are some teams that, They figure out what their deals. You have to you have to plan for the long term. In Cincinnati, they got the Burrow contract done. Logan Wilson, Jermaine Pratt, Chase is going to be on the horizon. Huggins is up on the horizon. All this kind of stuff. But they're $12.5 million under the salary cap. If you're a fan, do you have a legitimate beef in saying, you got to be kidding me? We're not spending another $12.5 million to fill some little hole. Because let's be honest, the last 2 years, the Bengals are probably a total of 5 plays away from winning 2 Super Bowls. Certainly playing in 2 Super Bowls. Does that mean anything, having $12.5 million under the cap, or it's just some number out there that really doesn't mean anything? it's a legitimate conversation to the degree that many times when you're that far under the cap, that now is a good time to knock off a bunch of little contracts. Let's gobble that up. Let's use it. It's like timeouts going into halftime, or let's or in the game. It doesn't do any good to bank these. Let's go ahead and use them. So let's go ahead and use it. But it has to be done within the perspective. Okay, what's the cap going to be next year? Which you don't know for sure what it is. How many players do we have coming up? Do we need to hold back some of that to get some of these bigger contracts done? So, yeah, there's a lot more nuance to it. And doing the type of thing I'm advocating is, okay, let's go ahead and gobble up some of this that we have right now on some other contracts so we can get it behind us and we can move on. That clears the decks for the biggest contracts. But sometimes that can be a problematic too, because if you're doing some deals during the season before the end of the year with some guys, then it can also create the atmosphere. Well, how come you're not doing that with me? How come we're not? And some guys can deal with that and hold it at arm's length and go ahead and let it happen during the season. Other guys, you don't want to get in contract conversation during the course of the season because, as I've always said, there's a time for pay and there's a time for play, and you need to keep the two separate. So there is some legitimacy to that, but you have to spin it going forward in terms of how can we better use this, who can we do this with, and what does that set us up going with the cap going forward. So that is legitimate to a degree, but there is more nuance to it than the average fan's going to understand.
I guess the last thing I'll ask in this vein is because the Bengals only have one player on their entire team, B.J. Hill, defensive lineman, who came to this team in a trade. They signed free agents, and they've done a great job, by and large, drafting over the last number of years. A lot of years, really, truth be told. Not perfect, but very, very good. Giving up a 5th or a 6th round pick. Now, to you, you may see that totally different than I do. I say to myself, I mean, really, how many 5th or 6th round picks? I'm not saying that there aren't, the game's not littered with Tom Brady. I mean, you go right down the line, right? Of late, but at the end of the day, most of them don't make it. Wouldn't you rather have a player that can get you there now than a 5th or a 4th round pick? Or is that wrong?
Sure. Well, no, and keep in mind, the underpinning of this, of course, is the Bengals are, how do I say this diplomatically, have always been a very frugal team, okay, in terms of their finances and the way they go about it. And which is a legitimate approach. We weren't big on trades in Baltimore, more so from the standpoint, and Cincinnati could very well be, is that trades many times are you end up overpaying. Like Dan Rooney, the famous quote was, I don't mind overplaying for a good player. I just don't want to overpay for a bad player. And sometimes when you make trade out of need, which is a terrible barometer to make a trade under, you end up, and like we just said, you take it on a contract or you make an agreement with the player that we're going to, do a contract with you. Sometimes that puts you in a position where you pay more than you probably should. So I think it has more to do with that okay. And trades, although they can be useful, when you look over the landscape of the NFL and you look at most trades, very far and few between where the trades have really worked well for the team that got the player. That player is being traded for a reason. And whether that reason can be overcome in the new environment, not that they all go bad, but again, because of the contract and a difference in the NFL compared to the others, I don't know that you look at a lot of championship teams, the pedigrees that year in, year out seem to be in it, whether it be Baltimore, whether it be Kansas City, particularly in season, that are teams that are particularly big trade. I don't mean minor back end, we'll get this guy, yeah, we'll throw you some back end stuff, but that involved that draft capital. I think the best teams in the NFL, the trade, I mean, there's always that. You draft, you get free agency, and you trade. Trading is the last of that three equation if you want to build a good team.
All right, last thing I want to ask you about, and I'll let you run. Thank you for your time today. Strictly from a Dallas Cowboys perspective, the Cowboys play the Philadelphia Eagles this week. There is no doubt whatsoever the Eagles so far this year have been the best team. They were the best team in the NFC last year. They get beat in the Super Bowl. Jalen Hurts, coming off a big game, big fourth quarter the other day. But I'm not talking about Philadelphia. I just want to look at this strictly from Mike McCarthy, Jerry Jones, Dak Prescott, the Dallas Cowboys. The knock on them for years is they can't win a big one. They'll win some games, they'll look good, but when it really gets down to quote-unquote nut-cutting time, they can't get it done. It's only a regular season game. They got to play them again. But is this an important game for the Dallas Cowboys in the future of their season, even though we're only in week 9?
Yeah, huge, huge. I mean, at the end of the day, those big games you're talking about are playoff games. So that's all you're ever going to be measured by. They can sweep Philadelphia during the regular season, but I get in the postseason they lose. We're not going to remember that. But where we are right now, and this Cowboy team that thinks it's pretty good, coming off a good game against the Rams, to go on the road and beat Philadelphia would be a huge, yes, we are for real. If they don't, it is on the road, and you could say, okay, I get it, particularly if it's a close game. And you're not done by any stretch of the imagination, because obviously they're sitting there at 5-2. But that would be send a major signal to both Philadelphia in the division and the NFC as a whole. Yes, we are for real. We are the team we think we are. And so this would be huge. If they lose, it's not the end of the road. But if they win, it could be a huge catapult step up for them.
All right. Brian Billick, we thank you so much for your time, my friend. Have a great rest of your day.
We'll do it.
All righty. Coach Brian Billick, Super Bowl winning head coach of the Baltimore Ravens. Always great to get his expertise.